A dark cloud rose over Africa, not of storm but of wings that blotted out the sun. Billions of desert locusts swarmed fields, turning green harvests into barren wastelands. Farmers watched helplessly as years of hard work vanished in a single afternoon. The buzzing roar of the swarm echoed like thunder across villages and farmlands. Entire crops of maize, wheat and sorghum were devoured, leaving empty husks behind. Communities that relied on farming faced hunger and despair in the shadow of insects. Governments scrambled to fight back, spraying chemicals, but the swarms were relentless. This was not just a plague but a battle between humans and nature on a grand scale. Stay with us as we uncover how Africa faced one of the worst insect invasions in history. Like and subscribe to follow more gripping stories of survival and natural disasters. 1. The sky that turned black with wings. The sun rose golden, but soon the horizon darkened with a moving storm of wings. Birds fled in fear, shadows stretched, and day became night beneath their swarm. The locusts came in billions, blotting out light and air with their endless flight. Wings rattled like drums of war, drowning out the cries of men and beasts. The air filled with dust, as if the desert itself had taken flight to conquer. Children screamed, believing the sky itself had fallen upon their villages. Every tree shivered, every field trembled, awaiting the wrath of the swarm. The locusts descended, their bodies covering walls, roofs, and every open space. Like a moving curtain, they blanketed the land, turning green into gray. The noise was deafening, as billions chewed in unison, a sound of doom. The heat of the desert combined with the beating of wings made air suffocate. No bird, no beast, no man could stand against this tide of living hunger. The world felt smaller, as if trapped inside the belly of a moving storm. Eyes burned with dust, ears rang with endless scratching, skin crawled with fear. 2. The fields that became dust overnight. Fields of maize, millet, and sorghum stood tall under the morning sun. By nightfall, nothing remained but stalks stripped bare and soil torn raw. The locusts fell upon crops like fire, consuming in hours what took months to grow. Every leaf vanished, every stem was bitten, every fruit destroyed without mercy. The golden promise of harvest became a graveyard of dust and silence. Farmers cried out, chasing with smoke and fire, but the swarm laughed in numbers. Fields that fed thousands became barren in a single unbroken day. The smell of fresh crops turned into the bitter scent of chewed stalks. Earth itself seemed wounded, bleeding with every bite the swarm inflicted. Children ran into fields to save what they could, but found only emptiness. The locusts did not rest, their hunger endless, their destruction total. The sun set upon wastelands, where once oceans of green had danced. The earth whispered sorrow, its bounty stripped and stolen by wings. Animals roamed starving, finding no fodder where abundance once thrived. 3. The villages that watched hunger arrive. Villages stood helpless as the swarm rolled in like a sea of death. Mothers clutched their children, eyes wide with the horror of vanishing food. Fathers struck pots and drums, but the swarm laughed at their noise. Huts darkened as locusts crawled over roofs, blocking even the light. Every storehouse shook as insects forced their way into every crack. Food saved for months disappeared in minutes, stolen by tiny jaws. Villages once filled with song became graveyards of hunger. The plague left no feast, no crop, no morsel to feed the people. Women wept quietly, seeing their children beg for food they could not give. The elders whispered that this was punishment sent from the sky. Every pot turned empty, every jar lay barren, every basket mocked with nothingness. Smoke filled the air as villagers tried burning grass to drive locusts away. 4. The animals that found no pasture. Cows wandered aimlessly, their eyes wide with hunger and ribs sharp as knives. Goats bleated weakly, searching for grass that had been stolen overnight. Camels bent their long necks, but found only dust beneath their lips. Chickens pecked in vain at barren soil, finding not a single seed. Sheep huddled together, thin and trembling, their wool dusty with ruin. Pastures that once spread green had been erased by the plague. Animals staggered, their steps slow, their spirits broken by empty fields. Farmers cried at the sight of their starving companions, helpless to aid. Children watched their animals with tears, knowing they too would soon go. The bond between man and beast cracked under the weight of hunger. Animals drank water, but water alone cannot fill an empty stomach. Their bones showed more each day, signs of famine etched into skin. 5. The farmers who fought with empty hands. Farmers rose at dawn with sticks, pans, and fire, determined to protect their fields. They banged drums, shouted, and lit torches, filling the air with smoke and fear. But the swarm laughed at their efforts, for no hand could fight billions of wings. Men ran through fields, chasing, swinging, but locusts returned faster than driven. Every hour of fight left them weaker, while the swarm remained endless. They burned grass, hoping flames would scare the cloud away, but fire died fast. Some poured water, thinking drowning would work, but insects flew unharmed. Men climbed trees, shaking branches, only to see insects return in greater numbers. The farmers' arms bled with scratches, but still they fought in vain desperation. The sound of banging pans echoed like war drums across the land. 6. The mothers who could not feed their children. Mothers held pots in their hands, staring at emptiness they could not fill. Children cried for food, their voices sharp with hunger, piercing hearts of mothers. They searched jars, cupboards, and baskets, but found only dust and air. The swarm had stolen not only crops, but the meals of innocent children. Mothers wept quietly at night, so their children would not hear despair. Their hands grew thin, their bodies weak, but they fed children first. Some boiled water with herbs, pretending it was soup, to silence cries. Others gave dry crumbs, stretching them across days like fragile treasures. Babies nursed at mothers' breasts but found no milk, only emptiness. The sound of crying children spread through villages like sorrowful wind. Every mother carried guilt, though the fault was not theirs but the swarm's. They sang lullabies to soothe hungry bellies, though hunger grew stronger. Mothers begged heavens for rain, food, or miracle, but silence answered. Their eyes grew hollow, filled with helplessness too heavy to bear. 7. The storm of wings that stole the rivers. The swarm moved like a storm, covering rivers and lakes in restless wings. Locusts drank greedily, clouding the waters with their endless bodies. Fishermen found nets heavy, not with fish, but crawling with insects. Rivers turned dark, filled with corpses of drowned locusts floating endlessly. Cattle came to drink, but found water bitter, tainted with crawling life. Wells too were invaded, lids and covers no shield against desperate insects. Villages gathered at shores, staring at rivers that no longer gave life. The storm of wings consumed not only land but waters of survival. Children feared bathing, for waters moved with crawling swarms of legs. Boats rocked under the weight of insects that rained down like hail. Even sacred rivers, worshipped for centuries, seemed cursed and defiled. Water was no longer pure, it became another victim of the plague. Thirst grew alongside hunger, making despair deeper and sharper each day. Men tried filtering water with cloth, but insects filled it again. Some burned floating corpses, but smoke rose with no end to bodies. Water turned from giver of life into bearer of decay and rot. The swarm proved no boundary held it, not earth, not sky, not water. The rivers themselves seemed conquered, their spirit broken by endless wings. And so, thirst joined hunger as a second chain upon the land. 8. The markets that fell silent overnight. Markets once filled with laughter, trade, and the smell of food fell silent. Stalls that overflowed with fruits and grains now stood barren and broken. Merchants sat idle, their baskets empty, their faces carved with despair. The locusts had devoured not only fields but the very heart of trade. Villagers walked through markets searching, but found nothing to carry home. The plague devoured not only crops, but the very rhythm of life. Travelers turned back, finding no food for journeys or trade. Merchants shut their stalls, their cloth covers waving like flags of defeat. The sound of bargaining disappeared, replaced by silence heavier than death. The marketplace became a graveyard where hunger ruled supreme. Communities lost not only food but the joy of gathering together. And so, the heart of villages stopped beating when the markets fell silent. 9. The children who chased shadows of food. Children ran across barren lands searching for fruits that no longer grew. They climbed trees hoping for mangoes, but branches were bare and broken. They dug soil with fingers, seeking roots, but found only dust and stones. The swarm had left nothing, no fruit, no grain, no grass, no hope. Their games turned into desperate hunts for crumbs left behind by fate. Children cried at night, dreaming of bread they could not taste. They chased shadows of food, illusions born of hunger and tears. Some chewed leaves, bitter and dry, to silence the growls of stomachs. Others stole from one another, fighting over pieces too small to matter. Mothers watched helplessly, unable to stop their children's slow wasting. Bones showed where flesh once was, eyes sank deep into hollow cheeks. The laughter of childhood was replaced by weak cries of exhaustion. Children fainted in fields, too weak to walk, too hungry to play. Dreams of school vanished, replaced by endless hunts for survival. Every shadow of food became treasure, every crumb a gift of life. But shadows cannot feed, illusions cannot fill the emptiness of hunger. The plague had stolen not only crops, but childhood itself. Their innocence faded beneath the weight of hunger's endless cry. Children grew older in sorrow, skipping years of joy and play. And so, the youngest became the first victims of famine's cruelty. 10. The elders who remembered old plagues. The elders sat in silence, watching history repeat itself before their eyes. They remembered stories told by their fathers of plagues long ago. Locusts had come before, they said, but never in such endless numbers. Their voices trembled, for memory alone could not ease present hunger. They warned the young that the land had always been tested by famine. But this plague felt larger, stronger, more merciless than any before. The elders recalled prayers, rituals, and fires once used to fight swarms. Their hands shook as they blessed children, fearing many would not survive. They spoke of patience, but patience could not fill empty bellies. They remembered markets filled with laughter, now tombs of silence. 11. The prayers that rose from empty lands across the barren farmlands where nothing but dust and desolation remained. Men and women lifted their trembling voices toward the heavens, begging for salvation from the endless plague of locusts that had stripped their lands bare. The temples, mosques, and churches across Africa echoed with the same cries, faiths divided by belief but united by hunger, each voice seeking mercy from the relentless swarm that showed no regard for human suffering. Mothers knelt with children clinging to their sides, whispering ancient verses with cracked lips and hollow eyes, prayers turning into tears that fell like rain onto the lifeless soil. Every candle lit inside holy walls was not for joy or tradition but as a desperate plea for divine intervention, a fragile light against the suffocating shadow that the insects had cast across the land. In the stillness of night, the voices of prayer rose like a wave of sorrow, carried by the wind across valleys and deserts, echoing with the despair of millions who had nothing left but faith. Old men clutched their scriptures, their hands shaking not from age alone but from hunger, their words echoing with conviction even as their strength ebbed away. Children clasped their tiny hands together, asking not for toys or laughter but for a single loaf of bread to silence the pain tearing through their frail bodies. Songs of devotion turned into dirges of survival, with every verse sung not as tradition but as one last shield against the plague of hunger. Fathers bowed their heads not in pride but in brokenness, their voices rising with words that asked only for rain, food, and deliverance from despair. The locusts, however, did not pause, did not heed, did not relent, their wings drowning out even the loudest cries that reached the sky. And yet, even as the insects devoured the land, the prayers grew louder, stubborn as the last roots clinging to ruined earth. Hope, fragile but unbroken, pulsed through every whispered verse, becoming the invisible bread that kept the starving from collapsing completely. Faith became the one harvest untouched, filling empty bellies with courage when no grain remained to fill them. The prayers rose higher and higher, creating an invisible wall of human resilience even as the swarm pressed harder upon the earth. The land was silent, but the voices gave it life, echoing with a sorrow that could not be measured in crops alone. Every prayer was a cry of defiance, an announcement that the people still lived though their fields had died. The heavens remained quiet, yet the voices never ceased, for surrender was more frightening than silence itself. The swarm mocked them with buzzing wings, but still, humanity raised its voice, proving that even in ruin, faith could not be consumed. The land spoke through the voices of the people, and though empty of food, they overflowed with spirit. In the war between wings and prayers, the insects devoured the earth, but the people held on to the sky. 12. The families torn between survival and despair. Families gathered in the ruins of their homesteads, watching the locusts eat not only their crops but the very future of their children, leaving them with empty stomachs and heavier hearts. Mothers tried to calm their crying infants with lullabies, but the songs broke into sobs as their voices cracked from hunger and exhaustion. Children who once ran freely through fields of maize now stumbled weakly across barren soil, their laughter stolen by the swarm's merciless jaws. Fathers stared into the distance, faces hardened not by anger but by helplessness, for no tool or weapon could fight back the endless sea of insects. Grandparents whispered stories of past plagues, yet even their memories could not match the horror of this unending assault. Families were torn between staying in their ruined homes or walking for miles in search of aid, both paths leading into despair. The little food they salvaged was divided into crumbs, with mothers often giving up their own share so their children could eat. Each meal became a ritual of sacrifice, a painful reminder of how survival meant choosing who would eat and who would sleep hungry. Fires once used for cooking now burned only for warmth, their smoke carrying the bitterness of hunger rather than the aroma of food. Children asked questions their parents could not answer, their innocent voices asking why the sky hated them, why the earth no longer gave them food. The swarm had not only consumed their fields but also shattered the bonds of joy that held families together, leaving only sorrow. Hope turned into silence around dinner tables where no food remained, only the sound of empty bowls clinking against the floor. Parents told lies of hope, promising food tomorrow, promising rain, promising miracles they themselves did not believe. 13. The farmers who fought a losing battle. Farmers stood helpless in their fields, swinging sticks, waving cloths, and banging metal pots, but every noise they made was swallowed by the thunder of wings that darkened the horizon. Their hands, calloused by years of labor, shook with rage as they watched entire fields disappear in minutes. The sweat of a whole season devoured in the blink of an eye. Some tried to light fires, their flames rising high into the choking air, but the locusts flew over the smoke and returned unhindered to strip the land bare. Others ran into the swarms, their faces covered with cloth, trying to chase them with buckets of water and handfuls of ash. But their efforts were no more effective than chasing the wind. Farmers screamed into the skies, their cries lost in the roar of countless wings, voices breaking with a fury no one could hear. The earth beneath their feet crumbled into dust as crops that once promised life now turned into skeletons of broken stalks. For every locust they struck down, 1,000 more descended, filling the air with a rain of jaws and wings. The weapons of men, fire, water, sound, were nothing against the endless tide of hunger that swept across their homes. Children stood at the edges of the fields, watching their fathers fight battles they could not win, their young eyes seeing despair etched deep into the lines of hardened faces. Farmers who had always been protectors of the land now became powerless witnesses to its destruction, unable to defend the soil they had sworn to nurture. 14. The vanishing greenlands. Before the swarm, the once lush fields of Africa, painted in shades of green and gold, stood proudly as symbols of life until the locust swarms descended like a rolling storm cloud. Every stalk, every blade of grass, until nothing but dust and silence remained across the horizon. The fertile lands that had promised food and abundance now turned into graveyards of shattered crops, the ground littered with broken stems that whispered stories of labor wasted and seasons betrayed. Villages that once thrived in the embrace of fertile fields were left staring at barren landscapes, their pride in the earth replaced with dread at the emptiness around them. The rivers still flowed, the wind still blew, the sun still rose, but without green life the land seemed cursed, stripped of its beauty and heart. Birds flew over the fields searching for food, yet even they found nothing but the bones of plants that had once flourished under their songs. The earth cracked under the heat of the sun, the soil no longer shaded by crops, leaving dust storms in the wake of the swarm. Shepherds led their animals through wastelands, the hungry livestock nibbling desperately at roots and dirt, unable to find even a mouthful of grass. Each mile of land turned into a desert before the eyes of those who once worked it, a transformation so swift and cruel that it felt like nature itself had betrayed them. The green landscapes that painted African life were swallowed whole, leaving only the bitter color of dust and famine. Horizon after horizon became empty, the stretch of lifeless fields mirroring the hollow hearts of the people who depended on them. What had taken months to grow was stolen in minutes, the pride of a farmer's hand reduced to crumbs under the jaws of the swarm. The beauty of sunrise lost its glow when there were no green leaves to catch its light, no crops to wave in its warmth, only shadows of despair across the soil. Every tree that had stood as shelter was stripped naked, branches bare, the silence of death echoing through its limbs. Children who once played in fields of maize and millet now wandered across dust plains, their laughter silenced by hunger and grief. The air smelled not of fresh harvests but of decay, a stench of destruction that clung to the land like an endless curse. The vanishing greenery was not just a loss of crops but a loss of memory, a ripping away of the beauty that gave people hope each season. 15. The animals starving in the shadow of the plagued cattle wandered through fields of dust, their ribs pressing through their hides as they searched endlessly for grass. Goats bleated weakly as they licked barren soil, their mouths filled with nothing but sand, their cries echoing like desperate prayers for food. Horses that once carried farmers to their fields now stumbled on weak legs, their strength stolen not by age but by hunger. Shepherds watched helplessly as their flocks shrank in size, some animals falling to the ground unable to stand again, becoming shadows of themselves. Birds circled desperately over villages, wings heavy, beaks searching for insects that had already consumed everything. Even the rivers offered no comfort, for without plants along their banks, the water was empty of fish, the currents carrying nothing but silence. Dogs barked less, their once strong voices reduced to whimpers as hunger drained their energy and dulled their loyalty. Wildlife fled deeper into forests, but even there the locusts had passed, leaving stripped trees and barren landscapes in their wake. Animals collapsed under the sun, their eyes dim, their bodies trembling, victims of a hunger that humans could not relieve. The connection between humans and animals, once built on care and survival, now became a shared suffering, a partnership in despair. Villagers watched their cows fall, their goats weaken, their donkeys collapse, each loss another cut to their already broken hearts. The animals had no voice to cry out, no words to describe their suffering, but their silent eyes told stories of pain too great to bear. Farmers wept not only for their crops but for their animals, for the cows and goats that had been like family were now vanishing one by one. Each animal lost meant more than hunger, it meant the collapse of a livelihood, the breaking of a bond, the loss of milk, meat, and hope. Even strong bulls bent under starvation, their once mighty forms reduced to hollow frames that stumbled in dust. The animals mirrored the despair of the people, each weak step echoing the weakness growing in human hearts. Some families chose to slaughter their animals early, not out of cruelty but to salvage the last bit of nourishment left in their bodies. Others watched their animals die slowly, unwilling to end their suffering, yet powerless to save them. The locust plague devoured crops first, but the true wound came when it left behind dying animals, starving humans, and silence. The animals were victims too, silent sacrifices of a war waged by nature, their suffering carved into the memory of the land forever. 16. The silence after the swarm passed. When the swarm finally moved on, it left behind not peace but a silence so heavy that it pressed against the chest of every man, woman, and child. The sky, once filled with the roaring thunder of wings, now stood empty, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise had ever been. The fields lay stripped bare, their skeleton stalks standing as tombstones to the life that had once danced under the sun. People stood in stunned quiet, unable to speak, unable to cry, for words had no power to describe the devastation. The silence stretched across villages, broken only by the hollow sound of wind blowing across empty land. Even animals made no sound, their bodies too weak to cry out, their voices lost to hunger and exhaustion. The laughter of children, once the heartbeat of every village, vanished, replaced by the quiet shuffle of small feet over dust. Houses that once smelled of cooking food now carried the scent of smoke and emptiness, their fires cold. The silence was heavy with fear, for it carried the question of tomorrow: what would the people eat, what would the children drink, how would they survive? The sound of insects no longer filled the air, yet the memory of their wings buzzed in the minds of those who had endured them. Every broken stalk whispered in silence, telling stories of lost seasons, wasted labor, and vanished hope. 17. The aid that came too late. When the locust plague had already stripped fields bare, aid trucks rumbled into villages, carrying sacks of grain that felt too little, too late. Hungry eyes followed the convoys, children clapping with weak hands, mothers whispering prayers of relief, but fathers knew the truth, that no truck could replace a season of lost harvest. The food was distributed with care, but the lines stretched endlessly, each person holding bowls that seemed too small for the hunger they carried. Sacks of flour, rice, and beans brought brief relief, but they vanished in days, leaving stomachs empty again. Aid workers wept silently as they handed out food, seeing the thin faces of children who were already too weak to smile. The grain was measured, weighed, and rationed, but hunger could not be measured, it overflowed into despair. Families walked for miles to reach distribution points, only to find the food already gone, their journey ending in tears. Aid came, but it could not undo the silence of barren fields, it could not bring back green life to the land. Doctors came too, but their medicines worked slowly against the faster grip of hunger. Some aid was spoiled on the way, some stolen before it reached villages, making the little that arrived even less. The people accepted what they could, but they knew the plague had left them with more loss than any donation could heal. The aid was kindness, but it was not enough to stop the creeping famine that grew with every empty day. Children's stomachs shrank, their bones grew visible, their eyes dimmed even after eating the small portions handed to them. 18. The children who carried hunger in their eyes. Children sat on the ground, their bellies swollen not with food but with hunger, their fragile bodies betraying the cruelty of the famine. Their laughter, once the strongest sound in villages, now came rarely, replaced by the soft whimpers of hunger at night. Some children wandered barefoot through the dust, searching for roots or seeds, anything to quiet the ache in their stomachs. Their eyes, wide and hollow, told stories no child should ever live, stories of empty bowls and silent kitchens. Mothers cradled their children tighter, rocking them even when they had no food to give, their love the only comfort left. The youngest cried until their voices gave out, their tears drying on faces streaked with dust. Children played games no longer with joy but to distract themselves from hunger, their games filled with pretend meals and imaginary feasts. Some grew too weak to play at all, sitting silently, their eyes watching the ground with a sadness too old for their age. The plague had stolen their innocence, replacing it with suffering that carved lines of despair into their faces. Songs sung in villages lost their cheer, for the children's voices had grown faint. Schools emptied, not because of distance but because hunger made learning impossible, the classroom replaced with the desperate search for food. Teachers watched helplessly, seeing young lives fade in silence, their lessons swallowed by the famine. Each child carried hunger like a shadow, visible in their eyes, unshakable in their steps. The locusts had taken the fields, but the true theft was in the children's smiles, now buried under hunger. Every weak cry, every faint laugh, every silent stare was a reminder of the plague's cruelty. Villages gathered to comfort children, but comfort without food was another form of sorrow. The children dreamed not of toys but of bread, not of games but of bowls filled with food. Their eyes haunted their parents, for no parent could endure the silent question, "Why is there nothing to eat?" The children carried hunger in their bodies, but the heaviest burden was carried in their innocent eyes. The plague devoured crops, but it was the children who bore its cruelest scars. 19. The prayers that rose with desperation in the wake of famine. Villages gathered at dawn and dusk, raising prayers that trembled with desperation. Men lifted their hands to the sky, pleading for rain, for seeds, for mercy, their voices breaking as tears fell into dust. Women sang hymns, their songs fragile, voices cracking under the weight of hunger yet reaching heaven with fierce hope. Children clasped their hands in imitation, whispering words they barely understood, their innocence fueling the cries of the community. Mosques, churches, and shrines filled with people who begged in unity, for hunger knows no faith, only pain. The prayers rose into the sky, carried on the same winds that once carried the locust swarm, a plea for redemption. The ground shook with the weight of voices, thousands crying as one, demanding that the earth return its bounty. Fires were lit, sacrifices made, elders spoke ancient words of hope, their voices trembling with age and despair. The prayers were desperate, rising not from comfort but from broken hearts and empty stomachs. Every prayer was a cry for tomorrow, for a future not swallowed by the swarm. Children prayed for food, mothers prayed for survival, fathers prayed for strength, all voices merging into one. 20. The lessons written in dust and hunger. The locust plague that devoured Africa left more than empty fields, it left lessons carved into dust, hunger, and memory. It taught that nature, in its fury, can undo months of human labor in mere moments. It showed that unity was fragile yet essential, for only together could villages endure the suffering. It reminded the world that hunger is not just the absence of food but the presence of despair. It revealed how quickly abundance can vanish, how swiftly pride can be humbled by the power of nature. The swarm taught governments the cost of neglect, the need to act swiftly when warnings rise. It showed aid agencies the importance of timing, that relief must arrive before the silence, not after. The lesson was written in children's eyes, a warning that the smallest lives suffer the greatest in famine. It was carved into the bodies of starving animals, proof that every link of life depends on the balance of nature. It was spoken in the whispers of mothers, who gave their food to their children and went hungry themselves. The swarm left scars not just in soil but in hearts, scars that would be remembered for generations. It taught that resilience is born in despair, that hope can survive even in empty bowls. It proved that survival is not measured by full fields but by the will to endure empty ones. The lesson was bitter, carved in hunger and silence, but it was also unbreakable. Every field turned to dust was a page in the story, every cry of hunger a line in its memory. The swarm passed, but the lessons remained, echoing louder than wings, heavier than silence. The people learned to fear, but they also learned to endure, to fight hunger with unity and hope. The earth would heal, but the memory would remain, etched forever into the soul of the land. The plague devoured Africa, but it could not devour the resilience of its people. The lessons written in dust became seeds of survival, planted deep in the hearts of those who lived through it. The desert locust plague left scars not only on fields but also on the hearts of millions. It reminded the world how fragile food security can be when nature turns against man. Farmers who once dreamed of harvest found themselves praying for even a single meal. The plague spread hunger, poverty, and fear, showing the true cost of environmental change. International aid poured in, but for many it was too late to recover what was lost. Nature once again proved that its smallest creatures can wield the greatest destruction. The memory of dark skies filled with wings will remain etched for generations to come. This story teaches us that resilience, unity, and preparation are our strongest defenses. Tell us your thoughts in the comments about how humanity can face such natural threats. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more true tales of survival and human struggle.